Welcome back, wanderers of the weird and the wicked. You've found your way once more into the shadows, where fact, fiction, and something far darker intertwine. Around here, history isn't dead. It lingers, it festers, it whispers. And if you stay too long, it just might claim you too. I am Cyborg, your guide through these haunted corridors of time. Before we step in, if you haven't already, push that subscribe button and ring the bell so it tolls like a funeral chime. That way you won't miss the next tale we upload, or whatever else crawls out of the dark. Let's get storytelling. This is the second installment of Eve's Tale, and our story will drift to Whitehaven, a town clinging to the wild west coast of Cumbria, though in those days it was still called Cumberland, a place of ships, trade, and whispers carried on the salt wind. But before Whitehaven's rise, there was an ending, the ending of a tree. The old oak, where Eve met her tragic fate, it did not stand forever. Let us set the scene. The year is 1703. Across England and beyond, the heavens themselves open in fury. The great storm, the first truly recorded in British history, sweeps across the land with a vengeance unmatched. Ships sink, churches crumble, and forests bow before the wind. Thousands are claimed by the sea. Some whisper it was the judgment of God. Others, a punishment long overdue. Far to the north, the storm's reach is weaker, yet still cruel. In Cumberland, at a lonely crossroads where a once thriving village had faded into legend, there stood an ancient oak, a tree steeped in silence and in secrets. For beneath its boughs justice had been carried out, or so the villagers believed. But justice is fickle, and wood remembers. When the winds tore through Cumberland, the old oak groaned, shuddered, and fell. Lightning split its trunk, and its roots were ripped from the earth. Yet even in ruin, the story did not end, for something within the timber would not rest. Whitehaven in the early 1700s was a town alive with the sound of axes, saws, and hammers. In all of England, only London surpassed its shipyards. War and trade drove demand, and timber was the very lifeblood of this expansion. The ferocious storm of 1703 had torn down great swathes of woodland across Cumberland, yet even that could not sate the appetite of empire. War abroad, colonies to supply, and the hunger of commerce meant that the cry for timber never ceased. None was more prized than English oak. Heavy, durable, and with a grain that bound tight as iron, it was the perfect timber for hull and keel. Ships built of oak endured where lesser woods rotted or splintered. Yet moving such timber from the fells and forests of Cumberland was no easy feat. Roads were poor, hills unforgiving, and the labour relentless. But through grit, teams of horses, and the sweat of countless men, the oak made its way to Whitehaven's busy yards. The wood was waiting. Oak, once felled, was useless until seasoned. However, for shipbuilding, it was deemed impractical for such large timbers. The seasoning or drying process happened naturally once the wood was in place. Sometimes years would pass before the wood hardened and gained strength. And so Eve's tree, cut and carted with the rest, was stacked in a timber yard where rain and wind kissed it season after season. Silent, waiting. At last, some time later, it was chosen. A shipwright took his iron chisel, its edge hardened by the forge, and set to work shaping a great beam. By candlelight he laboured, the rasp of tool against grain echoing in the workshop. Exhaustion dulled his focus, and the chisel slipped. With a cry he drew back, his palm cut deep. Blood spattered across the oak. He cursed, bound his hand in a rag, and went to fetch help. When he returned, his breath caught. The blood was gone, not wiped, not dried into a dark stain, but gone, as if the wood had drunk it deep into itself. He touched the beam. The grain beneath his fingertips seemed warmer, as if something within stirred. From that night on, misfortune clung to the yard. Tools vanished, timber split at the wrong angle, men were hurt in freak accidents. Some whispered that the wood was cursed, but work pressed on, and soon the beam was built into the frame of a new privateer vessel, the Loyal Maid. The Loyal Maid's frame was barely raised when whispers began to circle Whitehaven's taverns. A new captain had been named to her, Nathaniel Brooks. Brooks was a man who carried his past like a shadow. In his youth, he had been a naval officer, serving under the flag of King William. But accounts differed wildly as to how his career ended. Some swore he had disobeyed orders in the heat of battle, turning his cannon upon allies for personal gain. Others claimed he had been court-martialed for cruelty too severe even for the Navy. Whatever truth lay buried in the records, Brooks had vanished for years after. And when he returned, he sailed not under the Queen's colours, but under none at all. Those years had turned him into something harsher. He bore the marks of battle, a jagged scar that ran from his temple to the corner of his jaw, a limp that gave his stride a predatory sway, and eyes as pale as seawater, eyes that seemed to weigh and measure every man in his path. By the time he came to Whitehaven, he carried with him a letter of marque, fresh ink upon the parchment. It was a thin veil of respectability that turned piracy into patriotism. Under its cover, Brooks was licensed to plunder enemy ships in Queen Anne's name. But sailors knew the truth. Men like Brooks cared little for crowns or countries. Profit was their only allegiance. In the smoky corners of the Black Anchor Tavern, men muttered that he had drowned an entire crew once, locking them in their hold and scuttling the ship to cover his theft. Others whispered he had traded in human cargo even before the company's merchants made it fashionable. Each tale darker than the last, and none spoken within his earshot. Brooks recruited his crew with a ruthless efficiency. He sought the desperate, men with debts, men fleeing justice, men who valued gold above conscience. His voice was sharp as a whip, his offers laced with promise of plunder. Those who hesitated were told plainly what awaited them: the rope or the sea. Few refused. When Brooks walked the shipyard to inspect the Loyal Maid, even the seasoned shipwrights fell silent. He ran his hand along the newly fitted oak beams, his touch lingering as though testing their strength. His lips curled into a smile that held no warmth. "She'll serve," he muttered, and the men nearby shivered, though the day was warm. That very night, a labourer who had been slow in his work was found drowned in the harbour, face pale and eyes wide. Some said he had drunk too much and stumbled. Others whispered that Brooks had pushed him, a lesson to all who might delay his ship's completion. The Loyal Maid grew under his gaze, her hull a cage of oak that already seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Brooks did not know it, but in his hunger for control, he had chosen a ship with a spirit, one that carried in its timbers a curse, a memory, a vengeance. And so the stage was set, a ruthless captain with blood on his hands, a cursed oak within the ship's heart, and a voyage that would soon cross seas where men's souls were sold like coin. The sea was calm when the Loyal Maid slipped from Whitehaven's harbour, her timbers new, her canvas white as bone. To the crowds watching from the quayside, she was a fine vessel, built to bring wealth across oceans, her decks armed for protection. And now, in 1710, the Loyal Maid would take her place on the Golden Triangle, a trade route carved in blood and coin. From Britain's ports, ships sailed heavy with goods, coal, iron, cloth, and tools. These were sold in Africa, bartered for human lives, slaves torn from their villages, shackled in darkness. Then across the Atlantic they went, bound for the plantations of the Caribbean. From there, sugar, tobacco, and rum flowed back to Britain. 3 points, one endless cycle of profit and misery. Her holds were laden with coal and manufactured wares, her crew pressed into service by coin or desperation, and deep within her timbers, unnoticed by all, lay a curse waiting to awaken. Michael had not meant to fall so low. Once he had been a cooper, a man of modest skill and steady work. But debt, drink, and a streak of misfortune had dragged him down. When he signed his mark onto the crew's ledger, he did not know that he was signing away far more. Now he found himself below deck, sweat running down his back as he worked the pumps, listening to the groans of the ship. From the moment he set foot aboard, he felt the ship's weight pressing on him. At first it was the groaning of oak, the natural strain of timber in the swell. But soon it was words, a whisper in the grain. Michael. He told himself it was the sea, yet the voice grew stronger with every mile. The voyage to Africa was hard but ordinary. Sails trimmed, coal sold, deals struck in sweat and silver. But when the slaves were brought aboard, packed in chains below deck, something shifted. The ship itself seemed to shudder. The air turned foul, food rotted in the barrels, fresh water turned brackish and sour. Rats multiplied in the shadows. Sailors muttered of bad luck, but Michael knew better. The voice told him, "It has begun." Captain Nathaniel Brooks, scarred and merciless, ruled with the rope and whip. He drove the men like beasts and treated the chained cargo below with worse than contempt. He claimed order, but it was cruelty. And the more he lashed, the tighter the curse coiled around him. His nights grew restless, his scar itched and burned. He drank heavily, trying to silence the groans in the wood. The crew suffered. Sickness spread, men collapsed from fever. Ship's biscuits turned green with mould, salted meat stank of corruption. The whispers grew louder in Michael's ears. Eve was with him now, not just in the hull, but in the shadows of the deck, the flicker of the lantern flame, the knots of the wood. They suffer as you suffer. He will pay. And you, Michael, you are my hand. The men began to fear him, muttering of madness, yet also looking to him with suspicion. And above them all, Brooks raged louder, punishing harder, as though fighting shadows only he could see. Then came the storm. A wall of black cloud rising without warning, winds tearing canvas to shreds, waves smashing the hull. Amidst the chaos, as sailors fought to keep the ship alive, Michael felt Eve's voice surge through him. Now. Justice. He forced his way into the captain's quarters. Brooks stood there, drenched, pistol in hand, his scar raw and red. For a moment their eyes met, and Michael knew the man heard her too. "Do you see her?" Michael cried. "Do you hear her?" Brooks roared a denial, but the ship betrayed him. The timbers cracked, the oak split, and from it Eve emerged, pale hands stretching, black eyes burning. She seized him, dragging him back into the wood. He screamed, his body twisting, scarred face swallowed by the cursed oak. When the storm passed, the crew found only Michael, trembling, whispering that the ship had taken their captain. The loyal maid was broken. With food spoiled, water gone, and half her crew dead, she turned not westward to the Caribbean, but eastward, limping back toward Africa. There, in desperation, the sailors did the unthinkable. They freed the slaves, hoping only to lighten the cursed load. Not mercy, not kindness, but survival. But in that choice, Eve's curse seemed to relent. When at last the ship staggered back into Whitehaven Harbour, she was half sunk, her timbers warped and blackened. Michael was dragged ashore in chains, accused of murder and mutiny. He spoke no defence, only that she had told him what to do. Locked in his cell, he sat in silence. But the silence was never empty. Eve was there, whispering still, just as she would whisper again, centuries later, to another Michael. The air inside the Whitehaven courthouse was thick with damp and smoke. Merchants, magistrates, and townsfolk crowded the benches, eager to hear the fate of the ship that had returned from the Triangle with nothing but misery. At the front stood Sir Edmund Brooks, face flushed with rage, his wig powdered too heavily, his fists gripping his cane like a cudgel. The magistrate, old and severe, adjusted his spectacles. Michael Rowe stepped forward. Michael, looking gaunt from weeks in the jail, stumbled to the dock. His hair hung wild, his eyes sunken yet fever-bright. "You are charged," the magistrate intoned, "with dereliction of duty, conspiracy against your captain, and mutiny upon the high seas. What say you?" Michael's cracked lips moved. At first no sound came, then, hoarse but steady, "There was no mutiny. The ship was cursed." Laughter erupted from the benches, cruel, sharp. Brooks sneered and scorned the onlookers, slamming his cane on the floor. Cursed? Convenient lies from a coward who abandoned his captain. Michael raised his shackled hands. The food rotted overnight. The water turned black. The rats came in droves, biting at our feet as we slept. The crew died screaming of fevers, and the captain was taken. I saw her. A woman emerged from the wood. She dragged him into the timbers. Gasps, then mocking whispers. "Mad. He's mad." "Silence!" He peered at Michael. "Do you ask this court to believe in witches, spectres, and childish fancies, that a ship devoured her own master?" Michael's voice cracked but grew louder. "She speaks still. She is with me in the darkness of my cell. Eve, you hanged her, and now she will never rest." A ripple of unease passed through the court. For a moment, the laughter died. Even the magistrate's hand trembled before he forced composure. Brooks broke the silence with a bark of scorn. "You see, a madman, a traitor. He dishonors his crew, this port, and the crown itself. The voyage failed because these dogs shirked their duty." The judge nodded gravely. "The sentence is clear. Though we find insufficient proof for the gallows, you and your fellows will suffer lashes and imprisonment. Let it be known that Whitehaven will not suffer mutineers." Michael swayed as the guards seized him, his eyes, wide and unblinking, fixed on the polished oak panelling of the court. And for those close enough to hear, a whisper escaped his lips. "She's here, watching us all." Why return to Whitehaven, knowing mutiny charges might hang over them? Because they had no choice. The storm had crippled the vessel, their food had rotted, their water had turned foul with vermin. No other port would take them, and some swore it was as if the ship herself had dragged them home, her timbers groaning with a will not their own. For years the loyal maid lingered in Whitehaven's harbour, her hull creaking, her timbers warped with salt and sorrow. Her sails in tatters, a husk of a vessel that no man dared board after nightfall. Whispers spread along the quayside of strange sounds in the hold, of shadows that slithered where no lantern burned. Sailors swore they heard whispers if they passed her at night. A woman's voice, mournful one moment, vengeful the next. Men who tried to work her timbers met with accidents. A crushed hand, a snapped neck, a sudden fall into the dark waters. Soon, no carpenter dared touch her. Some said the men who limped her back had been cursed, others that they had been fools to attempt to cross the Atlantic at all. Yet her story did not end there. Sir Edmund Brooks, ever the opportunist, saw value where others saw only ruin. The insurers paid out, and though the vessel was a loss, he repurchased the remains of the cursed vessel after the insurance had been accepted. For salvage, claiming, "My ship, my timber, mine still." However, he didn't get any opportunity to repair her, as he too would succumb to an ill-fated and untimely death. Perhaps the hands of misfortune stretched out from the ship to claim him. So the ship remained and steadfast. Superstition alone might have kept her moored until decay claimed her. But fate intervened. In April 1778, when John Paul Jones launched his daring raid on Whitehaven, the port erupted in fire and panic. Amid the confusion, the loyal maid was struck, her rigging ablaze, her hull scarred by musket fire. By dawn, she was little more than a gutted carcass. The story of the ship became a fireside tale, a warning whispered to apprentices and sailors. But legends have long shadows, and the vengeance bound in oak does not sleep forever. It was Edmund the Younger who took an interest in the loyal maid's carcass. The insurers paid out again, and though the vessel was a loss, its timbers were not. Timber was too precious to waste, so he ordered the best of it stripped and carried inland, to be worked into the bones of a new manor house he intended to raise outside Whitehaven. A statement of power, a monument to wealth, a place, he declared, to stand for centuries. In our next installment of Eve's Tale, we will be venturing further into the era of the Georgian gentry, a time of opulence leading to decadence and all behind closed doors. A massive thank you to all of you who made it to the very end. I hope you can sleep well tonight, though perhaps with one eye open. Did you see the ending coming, or did it take you by surprise? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I look forward to reading them. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories in the same vein. And if you know someone who might appreciate a dark tale such as this, share it with them. It helps the channel grow and feeds the algorithm. There are many more stories yet to come, so stay tuned. And once again, thank you for watching.